tarde, bem-vindos, bem-vindos.
Good afternoon. Welcome to C.A.S.E at COP30. It's a joy to receive all of you here.
A C.A.S.E é uma coalizão de 7 empresas presentes aqui no Brasil. Bradesco, Itaú, Itaúsa, Marco Polo, Natura...
It's a coalition from Bradesco, Marco Polo, Natura, Nestlé, and Valley, and we've united to reinforce the importance of the agencies in climate and nature. Our objectives is to give visibility to the solutions already implemented and scalable, promote dialogue and mobilize the action of multiple sectors of economy, and reaffirm the potential of Brazil and our companies in aligning the economical development and sustainability. C.A.S.E is going to be active for the next 7 days since 17th of November, approaching specific themes, starting with food systems today and going through economy, infrastructure, financing, energy transition, and circular economy. All of those themes are connected to COP30's agenda. Please pay attention to the program, and we'd like to leave our thanks with the 100 speakers that are going to be here approximately, but there are a lot of people who decided to be here with us and giving life to C.A.S.E. Also the coalition members that were months of work to make this happen. And our knowledge partners, Mandalas, Accenture, and Cebej, and the producer at Temu. And we hope that you take advantage of C.A.S.E. We're going to start the first panel, regenerative agriculture, mitigation, adaptation, and productivity is going to approach regenerative practices that have the agricultural practices and restoration of soil and exploiting a scale and conservation of architecture. With this conversation, I invite to the stage the Global Director of Sustainability of Globo MR, Paulo Manes, the leader of products, Stephanie Leffer, the director of Canta, Agriculture Cooperative of Tomé Sulão Pará, Cláudia Sugaya, and to moderate the panel, the director of Itaú BBA, Pedro Fernandes. Welcome and have a good discussion. Hello, good afternoon to everyone who's present here today. It's a pleasure to have you here and open the first panel of C.A.S.E to talk about a subject that is so dear to us, the regenerative agriculture. I think that we have been seeing this practice, even though it's missing taxonomy with the regenerative QR, to have this scale, great scale, and having diverse solutions that is very advanced and that affects the chains with different routes of what we can have. And to explore in some of those panels as the part of the animal agriculture, cacao, which are themes that we have in the Amazon biome, and as a technology, how can be part of this discussion as well, and that's why we have the agri-tools here. But to start off, to leave everybody on the same page, what I've discussed with my dear panelists here was exactly each one of them to present a little bit of where you're coming from and what you do. And Claudius, if you could begin. and which is absolutely enchanting here for us, who has less contact with the cacao world. And I think it starts with the right basis for that. So, good afternoon. I'm Claudia, producer, co-operator, and director of the Agricultura Sul, and is situated on the northeast of Pará, here in Belém, and 200 miles, I think, kilometers. I think it's a cooperative that we have for 94 years, and we have 160 members, and on those 170, we work in the system of agroforestry system, 5,000 hectares, where it involves around 1,000 to 1,200 workers working directly in the system of agroforestry system. Perfect. Stephanie, if you'd like to present a little bit who doesn't know or consume the AgriTools products. Of course, thank you, Pedro. Thank you, Case, for the invitation. I'm Stephanie. I'm the leader of the products of AgriTools, and I'm an internationalist and international lawyer with this company for 10 years. And just tell you a little bit more about our company. We are a technology company for agribusiness, and we take on all of the access of the agribusiness because this is our territory, the polygons of land, and it's this delimitation that can have different ends of goals. Whoever is buying that land, different inputs and banks that are giving credit for that territory. Our company started with this big social environment path, and AgriTools has brought a solution for a problem that for companies were very serious for the companies to try and guarantee that those chains of supplies were responsible and were respecting the social environmental rules. And with the remote monitoring, the satellite images and technology was a proprietary platform, and we started to supply solutions for those companies. And on the social environment scope, we have a lot of good success in bringing numbers, and 300,000 assessments per day, more than 4 million territories being monitored, and more than 200 million hectares in Brazil and Latin America and other countries of the world. And aside from that, we have this participation, institutional participation, very strong, especially on protocols, and that today that's been regulated as Protocolo Bolinha and of dos grãos. And in the last years, we've seen a change in the market, that people are talking more about carbon emissions, and our clients, our partners, they also started to have projects, making projects that would bring those agriculture to those activities. So we also had our action on the monitoring of productivity to guarantee this production to be resilient, and following those patterns of monitoring, not only social, environmental, but productive as well. So it's really nice to be here and talking about regenerative agriculture, and I hope that I can contribute to this discussion. Paulo, my friend, he buys corn in Brazil, historically the biggest buyer of corn for I think MRVF, it doesn't need any introduction. MBF in Martinique, and I think maybe it'd be news for you of Marfik. It's accumulating the responsibility of BRF on the part of sustainability, and try to understand a little I didn't think we've been talking so much about livestock, but there's a lot of challenges of the MBRF as a whole in Brazil. Well, perfect, Pedro. I think good afternoon to all, and thank you for the invitation. It's such a pleasure to be here. We are users of the agricultures for grain, and every day we monitor the precedency of the grains that we buy and this technology. Well, Pedro, actually, MBRF is almost been here for centuries, and it was launched in 22nd of September. And I think, as Pedro has said, has iconic marks for milestones for all of you. Quali, Bassi, Montana, but is a global company. We today have operations coming from the north, especially in the US, of different countries for the actions of Africa, Europe, China. So it's distributed globally. Basically, the products that we've fabricate is plant-based. We also have plant-based, but we have a company specifically dedicated to that. And the challenges are a lot. Basically, all of the inputs or raw materials that we have here in a certain measure has this degree of criticality very big. And where does it come from? We can assure that the raw materials that we've been buying, it doesn't come with any type of social passive or environmental. If it wasn't produced in this deforestation or indigenous area, more specifically talking about Brazil, if it wasn't on a quilombola land, or if it doesn't have any enslaved people there, there's a criteria of public procurement that we need to observe, to report, and obviously give it transparency. We are a company of open capital, so what we have of transparency goes with the final buyer. We need to with the investors as well.
I come from Afrique. I was much more involved with the cattle livestock. I see Paulo Barreto, my namesake. I always read what he writes. He always brings very relevant facts of what effectively happens in livestock breeding in Brazil and pathways we might have to solve these issues, among which I share and agree with him. But the fact is, we have to looking at MBRF, we have to check where the wood we buy comes from to drive our factories, our ovens. And as mentioned, we are the largest grains per buyers in Brazil: soya, sorghum, corn. Where does the palm oil come from that we use in many of our products? So actually, there's a set of inputs or raw materials we have to control, and we have to guarantee the precedence for. And there is a major challenge we have nowadays is not an issue of technology available. The major challenge is how to make that technology reach the front line so we can ensure this technology will make it possible for that to be done, not only at the level of one company, but at the level of all companies within this sector. I'll stop here just to make a pause, then we go step by step. Okay, perfect. Paulo, Stephanie, Claudio, thank you. A question I think is especially from Kant, the MBRF, is how regenerative agriculture is a differential strategy has a strategic differential for the future of agriculture, how this is inserted in the company's strategies, and how in the cocoa chain, animal protein chain, in your opinion, this game will be played? How is it going to be played from the standing point of differentiation and future strategy? Claudio, Paulo? Well, our cooperative began to work with agriculture and the agri-forest system since we began to be the largest powder pepper exporters, black pepper exporters. And then we had the problem of fusariosis, and that decimated our plantations practically. So before this happened, one of the teachers, one of the professors that came from Japan had already warned us that the culture in this region here in the Amazon region wouldn't work because of plagues, diseases that could come, and that really happened. So since then, our community tried to obtain this knowledge, not only with technology, but also observing nature itself in the Amazon region, which is to diversify the culture, the crop. And nowadays we see this is the right path or the right pathway for agriculture in our region. And we have been able to minimize with all this the use of inputs, chemicals, and also more deforestation. We have avoided for further deforestation. So agri-forest plantation, agri-forest crop is a regenerative culture, and we have observed this has reduced the use of technology pretty much, and people have been using this as agriculture to carry on ahead. A clear example was last year when we had a very bad period in terms of a drought. We spent almost 6 months without a single drop of water, and at the time we could observe where regenerative agriculture avoided more damage as we would have in conventional agriculture. This is a very good sign, and we see every year that goes by, environmental tragedies are going on, like in the state of Paraná just a while ago, and we don't know when something like that might happen, something that goes against our livelihoods. But regenerative agriculture may help us a lot in that sense. Can I just apologize the other panelists and explore a little further with Claudio here? I think Acanta is very well recognized as a major example where an agri-forest system were being included in a chain of highly added value inside a cooperativist system. That's a win model. And the price of cocoa, which is the main crop, from the cooperatives' revenue, the corporates have this as the largest income. It's a case that for a long time people have been talking about, and maybe the growth in the cocoa area, the growth of the number of amount of families involved with cocoa in Pará, it's still below the demand and the agronomic point of view. So I'd like to understand a little bit with you, Claudio, why don't we have, in Paraná we joke, they have OCEPAR that has tens of cooperatives of excellence, each one with its own flavor, but why such a large movement is not going on? Or maybe it is happening, maybe you give me some good news, but why isn't there an evolution in terms of amount of tons harvested of cacao in the state of Pará year by year? Why this beautiful example of Acanta hasn't viralized, so to say, in the other communities and around the state, throughout the state of Pará? It's a little complicated because within the municipality of Tomé, for decades, every year we plant cocoa, but if we take an average of annual production, it hasn't been increasing, hasn't increased over the last years. I think this is lack of knowledge transfer to the producers, and another issue is that in our agri-forest system, cocoa is the main crop. And the price it is today, I think if it would be in the monoculture system, it's almost unfeasible. But in our system we have over there, it's still feasible because there are other crops that can cover part of the cost of cocoa. And our cooperative always has absorbed all the products all the crops, the fruit cultures we have been absorbing. That's one of the alternatives that make the planters incorporate many crops within the cocoa plantation, and people buy it, since the production of seeds for the extraction of oils, fruit for the production of pulp, and so forth. So practically 90% of the production done in the SAFTA system is absorbed by the cooperative. That's an important point for the advancement of the cocoa crop. And the other regions of the state of Pará, we have the plantation of Pará, but a few areas are done under the agri-forest system. So these, from some time here, people have done this more, but if there's no joint of the buyers and this kind of crop plantation, there's no way moving forward. Yes, I think the chain production, I think from all the panels here, from all the talks here at COP, when we talk about restoration, we look upstream and we talk about seedlings, and when we talk about bioeconomy, we talk about how much the markets are developed to absorb this in terms of cooperatives that allows you to produce enough production, because producers alone doesn't see to the demand. If you escape from the soybeans and corn plantation, which is the main two crops in terms of volume in Brazil. But coming back to the original question, is how generative agriculture can be part or is part of the strategy and the development for of the future of the animal protein sector, and how this game is being played. Even you who have the advantage of being different places and then eventually connecting to producers and consumers with different expectations and challenges. Perfect, Pedro. I think what we have seen, so you have an idea, if we add all the areas only in Brazil, all the farms and properties that provide for MBRF, all the crops I mentioned, this will add to about 20 million hectares. It's almost the size of the state of São Paulo, and all that monitored with agro-tools. And when we went to look at the front line, the reality, or look at the reality of a producer, it's paramount to understand the pains and difficulties this producer has. I'm talking about specifically MBRF, but you can talk about the reality in Brazil. Brazil has an enormous complexity in agricultural production. We have 5 million producers, 2.5 million dedicated to livestock, to beef production. Coming back to this, which is the most challenging of the chains, it's more or less 1.7 million of small producers, and often these small producers are lacking what is basic as from regenerative agriculture, as we can call it, which is nothing more than taking minimum technology so they can produce minimally. So what is that? Taking minimum technology and technical assistance, do the proper management of their fields, do the production not only with one crop, but taking other crops and making integrated systems that from the emissions point of view, it's extremely positive. Also, when we talk about proper fields management, that's a major carbon capture, take energy saving, so these animals can be ready in a smaller lapse of time and use this technology to reduce pressure, and an opening of new fields. So the degraded fields areas we have in Brazil, if we could make a major movement so this recovery could happen, we would have space to double the production and a gigantic space to do ecological restoration still. So take back, reestablish the native vegetation, which is suppressed at some point. When we talk about specific MBRF chain, we understood that the policy we had and that we had been applying for some time, and it's not different from what happens to retail, what happens to the financial market in general itself. That is that the old exclusion policy, you can, you can't. The fact is that when you exclude someone from your supply chain, it doesn't mean to say he will stop producing. Much by the contrary, there's a saying that an old animal won't die in the field. There's always a space for that animal. So we began changing that logic, and we began saying, well, from my supply chain, 25% is blocked. That we saw back in 2019 when this mindset began changing. But why is it blocked? What goes on? What is the problem this producer has? Wouldn't we have the possibility of helping him to come back and produce according to our criteria, and obviously make him have a production that is more feasible from the sustainability standing point, and from the profitability standing point for him? Because there's another saying in the company, there's no sustainable production if before it's not profitable. It simply doesn't exist. So how can we make that arrangement? And within that arrangement, we began realizing that many of these producers, large part of them small ones, and especially at the front line of the chain, normally the ones that produce the calves, they were totally excluded and unable to do a proper production. So make his production be profitable, and obviously applying best practices, because often he didn't have resources, necessary technology to do that, didn't have access to technical assistance to help him do it. And we launched a program that we called at the time My Frig Verde Mais, now Verde Mais, only with the advent of MBRF, taking that to our grain producer partners also, and integrate them into the poultry and swine chain, because it's almost an extension of the company. You have pretty large control overall under all aspects, but the spot market in livestock had a larger challenge. So we began understanding the reality of each one of them and began doing a call. So they came to the company and brought the problems that made them have some kind of non-conformity. So and avoiding them to sell to our company. And we began understanding it was much more an issue of, one, helping do some document regularization, land regularization, environment regularization, but also his management. So as a producer that normally used the field till the end, and then he opened a new area, bringing down native vegetation to have pasture again. And then we began understanding it was paramount to take ways to the small producers, ways that made him recover the given areas and began producing them in a more profitable and with way and with best practices. And when we talk about best practices, they're the ones that bring more sustainable production to the front line. When we began doing that, we saw there were opportunities for the producers of not only producing livestock, but that also could bring with that livestock other cultures. And then we had the opportunity of integrated systems. So you have an idea, over 50% of the producers that provide for us nowadays use integrated production systems. And we have a goal of upscaling that till we get our scope 3 emission reduction objectives. And we saw that those producers, beyond having that kind of best practices, we saw they could apply technologies that nowadays we call regenerative agriculture, which is nothing else than best practices, better use of necessary inputs to do that, because he'll have information to do that, be that fertilizers if he's talking about agriculture, or best practices from the standing point of livestock production with genetic enhancement, so these animals get ready, grow faster. So we began realizing that when we take that to those producers, we began seeing that in a very short space of time, they began fulfilling the criteria of the company. And what does that mean? It means that from the beginning of the year of 2021 till the closing of last year, we began re-including from these 25% producers that were blocked, over 4,200 producers. That equals to 26% of the livestock slaughter in the company. Producers that before were still produced in a way which was not the best one, the more sustainable one, sold those animals to others who don't have the criteria we have. And we began saying, if I do that, I'm not part of the solution. So we began understanding that what we call regenerative agriculture, or regenerative livestock breeding, is to take best practices to the front line. So this is making it more productive. Can I do a contribution? Paulo mentioned the issue on reinsertion.
I think it's an opportunity to share with all this history of social environmental monitoring. We created a list of blockages for other companies. Oh, these producers you cannot buy because of deforestation, areas that are protected, and other criteria as well. And I think that was an issue that we took into account for a long time, because I think there's 3 to 4 years we started to be very strong in this reinsertion of the supplier. So I think last month here in Pará, we've been accredited to be in this productive re-inclusion in livestock, and I think Mato Grosso is going for the 4th year, because the producer on the livestock, with a lot of initiation for agriculture as well, the producer themselves, with the incentive of the companies, but in a proactive way as well, they can subscribe to these platforms of reinsertion and have this term of commitment and recognize that the deforestation that they shouldn't have done. And they take this commitment to have a regeneration of that area. And Agritus will monitor that producer for 5 to more years. And in Mato Grosso, we have more than 5,000 hectares being monitored of producers that are reinserting their areas and reinserting themselves to, it's what Paulo said, cow not to die old in the field. As the producer is trying to reinsert themselves and they were doing something illegal or deforestation, they can access the formal market and we can viabilize this reinsertion process for them. If I'm going to put a difficult theme for you now, I'm going to change here. I think Paulo have different things in his answer that will lead us to other subjects. And I think we can explore this conversation. We talking about the 3rd scope on the companies of consumption. I think it's a theme that is more present every day, where I think you have this path of the carbon compliance, but also less intensification on the supply chain. And I think it's something that was less present on the conversation a year ago. I think it might be what we've been observing on the bank, something that is different, capable of mobilizing capital. I think that's a theme that you've brought with your speech, and if it's regulation, and also the reinsertion. And the third is a more difficult theme. When we put a basis of compliances that's too high, we come to a certain results, and they ask us, why are you doing this livestock only on Pará? And I don't have the budget, I don't have the knowledge, I don't have reference pricing. And we need to adjust the levels for the game that everyone is playing. And that we intend to have this diversity inside of our agriculture. But the question is a little bit different for you. Agriculture has emerged as how to use technology to this compliance, coming from the warehouse of the Europe, specifically the Britannic, from Britain. I'm sorry. You have this privileged position of seeing what is the strategical point of view of your clients that they've been having with your supply chain. Who is doing differently in the point of view of looking at their chain, fomenting, generating value on basis of the information that is available about the land itself? Really good, your question, Pedro, and I'm very happy to have some cases to share with you. The first that comes to mind, we have a client in this agriculture area, which is the Caramuru, that started with the social environmental monitoring, with the data that we collected with them, with a lot of years of monitoring, approximately 8 years. They expanded for 4 different markets, utilizing the same data, but with a different path. So the companies that have the UDI challenges and other international companies that we talk about, Boishina, also have a power on the data that they use for the monitoring that is very big, and to see the chain in a strategical way and utilizing this data not only for compliance but also to rethink projects. A lot of what I wanted to speak, and I think you're going to ask me about scale, and I'm going to keep in mind for this answer. A lot of people utilizing the data in a way that is going to bring more security in jurisdiction, and it's going to be easier to execute this product that is going to the producer. And I think it's a general concern for all of us that we've been discussing. And I think the programs that is being launched by the companies bring this return for the supplier. And with the data, we can map how to optimize and how to accelerate the process, and to have and also with the regenerative agriculture, and that we're going to share. And the Syngenta, I think you have a, let's say about that too, Pedro, that has recuperated 270 hectares. I was going to say 170, but Pedro corrected me. And with this very strong biases of social, environmental, and all that, and looking at this daily recuperation for those lands. And I think we see that we can monitor 89 producers and 360 farms. That is a total of 270,000 hectares. I think it's more than 150 producers with our commitment until 2030 to recuperate 1 million hectares. We have this goal, and we've been having this capacity of growing more than 100,000 hectares per year. And with this year's, with the support of the Treasurer and Eco Invest, we can make those resources to go to the agricultures with the more interesting pricing and level being higher when it comes to compliance as well, where we have more competitiveness, and we can wake up earlier and work better. And I think it's a case that we have, we're really proud of. And I am the moderator only for who wants to hear a little bit more, go back to Grammar for an hour and a half on around that time. And I think we're going to be speaking about that a little bit more. Here, doing asking a question, I think, in a point of view specifically of the sector of which one of you maybe in this amplified sense, if you're comfortable. I think we are here on the second day of COP for the sector of cacao or Pará. What is the success of COP? What has been here for 10 days? For you to say that we were successful, what is the success to you? What does it look like to you? That was easy, I think. But it's not the second day. It wasn't in a briefing, right? Agriculture has been asking a lot to do this social environmental analysis. Let's start with Stephanie here. Well, I hope that the negotiations of Busoni and all that would be talking about the integration of data. This thing, especially for Brazil, is been a big challenge. So we have we have a lot of ways that the producer can be asked every day to update, and we end up creating this complexity for us that this data, if they were more integrated, this data, we would have better solution, more democratic, of easy access. And I imagine that this is the dream of Paulo and other companies, to be able to exchange information with other companies as well, because the positive impact that we are seeking is the same. So regardless of the competitiveness, I think with the sustainability data, the climate mitigation should be more open and shared. This transparency needs to be the goal of everyone. So we have initiatives in Brazil, we have platforms that are being created, the government is mobilizing itself, but we need to give more voice to this discussion and guarantee that the data will help the international accountability, and we can actually measure its progress in the climate agenda and the challenges of the NDCs. I hope that they're talking about data and how this is integrated between the different actors that are participating on the discussions. Now it's your time, Claudia. Well, COP30, I think it's an opportunity that is very big for us, the producers mainly, to show that to the world that Brazil is not what is being seen by the world. We have a lot of suppliers and a lot of livestock producers that are seeking new alternatives, regenerating and working to contribute with the environment. And I think this is still not divulged as well as should be. And we that work and live daily basis with the regenerative agriculture, we miss a little bit of the advertisement of the divulsion of our work. And I believe that the conscience of the agriculturists is very big to maintain this balance of the environment. And we can observe that each year that goes by, the climate has been changing. The worker themselves are questioning about the temperature, and a lot of them don't work after lunch because of the heat. But I think each day more we need to improve. We need to spread the word about the work, and we've been fighting to improve our agriculture here in Brazil. And I think it's a big opportunity to show that, to showcase that to the world. I think I have two perspectives of what to expect. In a more broad aspect is how to do this climate financing. How can we finance this transition that is in trillion of dollars, and how can we bring it to billions of dollars instead? So we have this monumental challenge where we cannot still coordinate and make it so there's this feasibility of this number of resources for this transitioning. So more specifically for Brazil, and if we bring to the animal protein world, I'd say that we have some challenges that are very complex, and we couldn't make it feasible because of the big numbers that we have. I'm going to invert it and ask you now. Do you have any idea of how many are the frigorifics of livestock in Brazil? Do you have any idea? We have 1,100 of them that operate in Brazil, of small and medium. More than 300 have SIF, which is the federal inspection system. Other of them are using municipalities or state procedures to do so. And when you take the three big ones of that sector that are open capital, do you know what is the share market that they have? Minerva, Mafigi, MBRF, and JVS. How much do you think it's is 50%? Is it 25%? The MBRF is around 5% of this market, and to mobilize those actions for us to make this flow through the industry. We are exporters, our company. 65% of what we produce goes outside of the country, and we are part of this association of the producers of meat in Brazil. 45 are associated on this, between all of those that operate in Brazil. We can barely between 45 producers inside of this market itself. So to me, success on COP30, and I think for that and all the COPs that I've been part of, and there were a lot, there's been always this one. How can we somehow have this sectoral coordination of all the actors that are involved, because this is involving investors, banks, civil society, and also the entities of research and the warehouses, the chains of restaurants, and also the industry. All of them have a role in all this complexity. How can we manage to do so? And involves another entity that we've been not able to do the mobilization, which is the public power. How can we build and mobilize the public policy so it can be implemented in Brazil? I think the biggest success that we could have in terms of sector, not only in relation to COP30, but also for us to be able in a mandatory way in Brazil to implement on livestock, but grains or any commodities needs to be traceable. This national traceability system that is mandatory. Those two examples of mandatory type of systems is Uruguay and Australia, and we couldn't make this feasible in Brazil still. We have this monumental effort to invest a lot of money of this system of mitigation of risks, not actually traceability based on satellite images that are provided by companies as agri-tools to mitigate the risks of having a problem of bringing a raw material to the conformities that we've spoke about in the beginning. If we could mobilize all of those entities, especially the produce systems,
we could show abroad that agriculture and livestock in Brazil is extremely positive, and no other country would be able to produce agriculture and livestock products with the environmental assets that Brazil could provide. And that is possible. We are the only company in Brazil that operates with a commitment that is over the Brazilian legislation. We operate under a commitment of zero deforestation, zero our suppliers must all comply to these environmental demands. So somehow we must see what effort we should do to make that kind of action feasible. Brazil, for example, still has over 60% of its biome, of course, always under risk, but they are there. And what would we need to do to remove that risk? And for that to effectively happen, what would we need? Because when you talk to investors or banks abroad or my clients in the United Kingdom, the question they ask is, okay, you're telling me all that, but how can you prove that? How does Brazil prove all this? Which are the effective data you can bring to corroborate what you're saying? So I'd say if Brazil effectively could implement that kind of solution, the discourse and the power and ability Brazil would have of placing even more products abroad would be monumentally larger. So I'd say success for me, not only in this COP, but in the Brazilian agribusiness, is for us to be able to bring in the necessary effort to make simple solutions feasible, because it's not technology, it's much more coordination and actions to put that into practice. That's it, Paulo. And sometimes we have, I think, something that we have invested in also through FEBRABAN, the Association of Brazilian Banks, is how to improve databases. We know BNDES, the Brazilian Development Bank, is financing a calculator for livestock. FEBRABAN financed it for soja meal. Nowadays, there's an FGV agreement with Secarbo and Brapa, and those data are the baseline for our NDC. So in the minimum, we need a good bar and have measures and intelligence to create impact. You made a comment in the sense that the largest reduction of carbon emissions in livestock was provided by a sanitary measure, which is on behalf of the Chinese with the boi shin, or China beef, that with this we slaughter much younger animals, and the amount of methane issued by kilo of beef was reduced a lot. So we have to see which way we have solutions that may sometimes create relevant impact. But looking towards regenerative agriculture, which is what which makes us, always run to beef, but something that I learned about agri-forest systems, there is no one planting cocoa that have yucca and some cattle with it, and inevitably we end up with other crops. But coming back to regenerative agriculture, I think that's something that has been growing, and I think we have some leverages here that have been placed to make this move forward faster. So I'd like to hear from you guys the relevance you give to that, without being exhaustive. If you think we have other leverages, maybe if you could each rank what you think is more relevant in terms of leverages. We have green credit, certification, payment for environmental services or for ecosystemic services, because carbon market, premium and price. Which of these leverages has been more effective for regenerative agriculture to grow, and where should our bet be placed? Or if it's not in these leverages, what leverages should we have to keep on growing with regenerative agriculture? And then for you to help me out, which is the role funding can have in all this? Well, for us producers, farmers, the largest relevance is partnerships with some large companies, banks, because our role as agricultures is to plant and drain the production. But having this partnership with some companies, like our example over there of our cooperative, we have partnerships with the Natura company. Nowadays we have a very large project, which is the expansion of palm oil in the agri-forest system. I think it's an important partnership for us to be able to expand the palm oil cultivation, which is like a fever in our region, but we should do it in the regenerative system with cocoa and other crops. Why do I say that? Because at the same time, we have this palm oil fever, so to say. The disease is moving forward a lot, and one of he means the pests, and one of the alternatives to combat with this pests, I think, is regeneration. Why do I say this? I was part of the project for the pioneer implementation of SAFI palm oil, and there we observed that within the agri-forest system, palm oil in the agri-forest system has much less pest incidents. I say that because in my area, we have the area of the SAFI Dendê project. Dendê is palm oil in Portuguese. And then there's conventional planting right beside us. And I had means of proving that, and when we did the pest control, while we had 100 pests in the conventional planting, conventional agriculture. At the same time, we went to try to collect within the agri-forest system, and it was practically zero, null. So this proves that regenerative agriculture is very important, but for that, having partnerships, I believe, makes it much more easier, mainly the financial support and also the issue of land regularization is one of our major bottlenecks in the region nowadays. Perfect, Stephanie. I think mentioning opportunities, technology can bring us more and more regenerative, sustainable practices in general. And I mentioned 3 opportunities I think are worth mentioning. The first one is in eligibility analysis for regenerative agriculture application. So do qualification, a prioritization strategy as to where these programs should begin as a crucial phase of these initiatives. Yesterday we were with McDonald's at an event, and they asked a question in the panel I thought was very good, which is when would you provide opportunities for other companies that want to use these programs? And the answer from their sustainability manager was focus on few great things. I think this applies a lot when we talk about eligibility studies for regenerative agriculture programs. And it's not only an eligibility for us to map areas where the level of degradation is high, for example. It's to do data intelligence that brings variables till they're not obvious in the study, in the survey. So look at the climate indicators, look at fitness criteria, and even specific criteria for each area. So to assure a program will have success and bring quick benefits, we consider logistics as a major point, because not that you will exclude producers that are not in a region with good logistic conditions, but you can create a prioritization plan of when you're going to reach those conditions, and that we can do with data crossing, with the use of technology, and it's a major potential. Afterwards, we have the issue of monitoring of these areas that are receiving those sustainable practices. So there's the obvious, there's the cherry of the cake, which is to measure and improve the results, but we also have this quick decision making. So when you're monitoring constantly the evolution of these areas, you can change the strategies if you see practices not being well succeeded in a quick manner. You can compare that in scale. Don't have to do it individually. You can look at standards from given areas, and those data will allow for better decision making. Decision making including to benefit producers more. You can see standards of practices or in farms that are being extremely well succeeded in the application of these practices, and give them bonuses if you have data that prove that that farm is effectively being an outlier in the program, right? And then taking the opportunity to talk about monitoring. Agro Tools developed technology, which is a mobile app that allows for self-inspection. And with this app, we want them to get directly to the producers, or in the farm managers, to collect information directly from the farm, like pictures, and that information is synchronized and sent directly to a geoprocessing analyst. So the specialist looks at those information and crossing with information of remote sensoring and DVI practices, he can assure that the work of the producer is being well done, and this information arrives to the company. So another use of technology that can drive company programs that companies are using more and more. Another opportunity I thought of was to how to use technology to bring information and potentialize those programs is risk management. The banks, you know well, are being demanded more and more to do the climate risk assessment and assure this is being monitored. We can put in this variable, the sustainable practices, I mean, into the equation, because we know when there's regenerative agriculture practices in the farm, this farm is more resilient, more resistant, inclusively for extreme climate events and climate change effects. So this variable can come into the calculation of a climate risk to begin balancing the scale and show the adaptation of the region facing those risks. So it's an opportunity of using technology to bring more and more information about these programs, to these programs, and make them be well recognized and more disseminated in many contexts. Well, thank you, Paulo. People went off topic a little bit, so I'll put pressure on you. We have to spread the chips, distribute the chips among green credit certification, bonuses for ecosystemic services, premium. What is our best shot to see regenerative agriculture area, high compliance, traceability growing exponentially? What do you think is the best pathway where we could literally put our chips? I think actually all these leverages are valid, and I think it will depend very much on the region, on the kind of crop you have, and the opportunity that is on the table. There's no solution that is a silver bullet to solve all challenges we have. As you mentioned at the beginning, I think the financial sector, the banks themselves have a very important role in this. I've said that with the mechanisms that are being created to fund this in the front line, mainly when we talk about regenerative agriculture. I think, Pedro, that more than proven, when we look at the front line to practices that are taken to this producer, we do a lot in Brazil already, but the direct planting, proper soil management, the use of bio inputs, when you when you associate different cultures and not only a single crop, all that makes you mitigate the risk of having plagues or losses in your production. That makes you have a production that will have a better market value. You'll be able to show some features of the production that will make you access better markets, for example. And so I think it will depend a lot on the location. We have properties in regions where you can have ecological restoration in given spaces, and this will be able to generate carbon credits that to a large extent will come back to that producer. Obviously, we're talking about a long-term thing, but that is, yes, an opportunity we have today. Payment for environmental services has shown itself as an interesting mechanism. For example, there is a practice that is already going on in Mato Grosso do Sul state, where the government created an incentive mechanism in which these practices afterwards come back to the producers in cash itself because of what he has been showing to have done. So it's an extremely interesting mechanism, must be more assessed. I have the impression this can be upscaled to other regions of Brazil. There is the client pressure itself causing a movement in that sense. You talked about the China beef that had a major contribution for the sector, and because of a series of issues in MPRF itself in 2019, the slaughter age average was around 34, 35 months. At the end of this year, this dropped to 29 months, the average slaughter age, and the carcass use has also raised. This is because of practices. And of course, this carcass with more use and the younger slaughter age brings economic growth for the producer because he will reach markets that pay better, and in the environmental side means less emissions also. So I'd say there's no single silver bullet, but it's the association of many solutions you mentioned that must be used according to the vocation that each one of the regions has. And us as industry that has direct contact with the producer, we have to help them also to choose the best pathway to go by this. And often they lack due information, mainly when it's a mid-sized, small producers. The large producers have this very easily done, have conditions of having the best decision they can, but that's not what happens in the production chain as a whole. Perfect, Paulo. I think you brought 3 candidates to be catalysts of regenerative agriculture, much better than the ones I listed here. I think we have a part of agriculture knowledge which is relevant. Claudio also mentioned how relevant this is when we leave large producers, especially in commodities or commodities in general that occupy a larger area, a larger surface where knowledge is already spread.
Knowledge is well distributed. I think it's fundamental for Embrapa as a role for Embrapa. I think you've brought as an important leverage for the access of the market. And we have Boishino example, and we could put in the coffee as well as accreditation. As I started my career, it was 15%, around 15% on the pricing of the coffee, and now the conditions of access for the chain of supply. As the journey of accreditation of the obtaining better standardization, access to the market, and guaranteeing that the Brazil's coffee is inserted, aside from some economical measures that impedes the equality on the coffee. I think the American coffee hasn't been as big as the Brazilian. I think we can demonstrate best practices inside of our coffee fields, and I don't think you've shared it so much, but a third is the adaptation, climate adaptation and resilience for the food systems. And I think it's three leverages that sometimes we are saying, oh, it's going to be taxation. I think those three are better cases, and I'll take it as a note when I am the other side of the sword as well. And I think we have a few minutes if somebody from the crowd wants to ask any questions. We have a first candidate. Please, if you can introduce yourself and ask your question. Hello, thank you. About Alavanca, the key point is the carbon market. We have 100 million hectares with some level of degradation, and Paulo has talked about the improving agriculture and the production, and this could be a restoration space that is very big, and it should have some investment there. And the world needs to cap carbon very quickly. And if Brazil is speaking about that, that has this exchange, the government and private sector globally have this capability of influence to say that we need a carbon market that can bring more resources. And I think Chickman is going to talk about this theme as well. He is leading a group of economists, very important, that is taking these conversations to the government, to COP30, and to reinforce this message, this market of carbon, with this big chance of forestal restoration. And I'm just going to reinforce that this has been a talk about regenerative agriculture, but we're going to need a regenerated landscape. And I'm going to talk about two recent studies that is important for this discussion. I think Brazil is getting dry very quickly. A big part of the reduction of rain is the deforestation and the elevation of the warmness when it comes to the global climate change, and less rain and bigger temperatures is making Brazil getting drier and drier very quickly. And we need more forests to bring and maintain rain. And this is a landscape scale. Part of the deforestation of the Amazon will influence what happens in the rest of Brazil and the world. And you talked about fixing it, and a lot of Concertação Brasil, and next year we are going to have elections, and we have that political cycles will a lot of the times influence and climate policies, and the influence of the climate is really there. And if we don't have this political continuity, I think the private sector has this key role into disciplining the politicians and saying this is not a game, we need to give continuity to those policies, and is going to have a debate and part of this policies. And it's essential for the private sector to bring this for the political debate. Forests will bring water that will maintain the air and that will maintain, and this is a coordination, a national coordination, where the private sector has a fundamental role. And probably you're talking about the CPI studio, and we've had, since morning, we have this Casa Amazonia talking about the restoration, and Paulo and myself, we have the privilege of having the being in the admin council, and one of the players that have been in this sector. And here we have challenges that have different dimensions. We have the dimension of the market, and I think we're going to have the opportunity here in the case to have experts to deepen this conversation. We have the challenge of market, regulation, and productive chain also. and framework as well. And I think we're going to have very competent people into this and getting this problem that have different complexities and different dimensions as well. If you have 4 variables and the change of each one is 80%, the chance of going wrong is more than 60%. And I think when we talk about restoration, we need, not because Paulo is here, but we need to eat the cow piece. So we need to go step by step. We need to go one certainty at the time. I'm not going to try and compete what is the scale of the landscape when we talk about the potential of the restoration in Brazil, but it's around millions of hectares, as if it's 1 or 2. This is the scale. And we sum up all the projects that are announced in plantations, and it's 130,000 and it comes to hectares. So it's missing 2 arrows. And I think we have elections next year, as we're going to have 3 years from now and 5 years from now, and unavoidably we are out of scale and electoral debate. And if we had some political solution, I don't think it's about the election. I think we have the opportunities throughout these 2 weeks to discuss how we can unstuck. So the 0 to 80 that is getting us out of scale, and so we can allow 90 to 0, so the restoration industry of the forestal beings can go in a relevant, written, and different from what we have today. I think we have at least, I could have gone away because it's just the moderator, but I couldn't resist. I couldn't resist to speak. Pedro, just getting into the subjects as well. We have a lot of companies, Bradesco, Itaú, Vale, that are also associated with this initiative. And it was born exactly to explore, in a good sense, this gigantic opportunity of ecological restoration in Brazil. We've been seeing the difficulty that is to actually keep this process going. And we have areas that really need restoration, and it's very hard to make it feasible because you are willing to pay a very expressive value of the carbon that can go to $80 today that we say, and trying to unstuck this market of a lot of motives that I'm not even going to talk about. If we can overcome this, the quantity of areas that we can restore for the ecological recuperation and productive also is monumental. So that's why I say the difficulty is how can we make it unstuck? How can we coordinate it in a way that is coherent and do it, making it effectively happen? So those are the, this is the reality today. Stephanie, Claudia, any comments? Because if not, I'm going to finish up this panel. If there's any more final comments, please do so. And I'm going to leave my thanks to all of you and everybody who's been following up this panel.
tá? Som. E chegou? Beleza. Pois é, quando ele quer anunciar nós dois, né? Aí eu fiz aquele direcionamento para não sair na gravação. Tá meio zoado, né? Não, mas tá bom, chegou, né? Beleza, só isso mesmo. Tá, daqui a pouco ele vai pedir para abrir, que ele vai fazer o pronunciamento aqui nesse microfone. Tá ok, beleza. Falou. Ok, te aviso.
boa tarde a todos.
Good afternoon to all. I'd like to invite you for the next presentations. On the plenary, you're going to have the presentation of field to shelves, Campo Gondola, innovation in agriculture and low carbon. I ask you to take your seats. Thank you very much. Welcome to CASE COP30. I'm Bianca. I'm the general manager, and it's a joy to receive you here. And it's conducted. If you needed devices for translation, please take so. If you have just gone to the second panel, I just need to explain who we are. We are from Bradesco, Itaú, Marco Polo, and Vale has united to talk about our big objectives of the case is to give visibility to the solutions already implemented and scalable, promote dialogue and mobilize multiple sectors, reaffirm the potential of Brazil and our companies in aligning the economical development with the sustainability. CASE will be active for a week until the 19th, approaching each day a theme from COP30. Today, food systems, tomorrow, economy, then infrastructure, financing, energy transition, and circular economy. I'd like to thank our 100 speakers, more or less, that are going to be with us and going to give visibility to this programming. And also the members of the coalition that are making this work, our partners, Accenture, Mandala, Excelabs, and the producer TM1. Let's start our panels. From the fields to the shelves, Allied to Net Zero is going to talk about the producers and industries and retail already having the supply chains, building them. We're going to amplify our discourse when it comes to best practices, sustainability, competitivity, and attractivity of the products. And now I'm going to invite to the stage the co-founder of Ambition Loop and high-level climate chamber, Gonçalo Munhoz. Just a second, technical problems. It's always good to drink a little bit of water in this heat. As PeXPoco executive and president of Conselho EFTES, Andrea Alves. The director for Brazil of Globson, Álvaro Meigo. And to moderate the panel, the Executive Director of Sustainability and Transformation of Business in Nestlé, Bárbara Sapana. Welcome and have a good discussion. So good, we're in a small group. So my name is Bárbara Sapana. Good afternoon. It's a pleasure to be here with you today and make it easier, this conversation. There's such a good conversation, which is food. And when we think about food systems, it's a theme very precious. It should be to all of us people. Food gives us sustenance every day. But in a way, this theme have been absent from the conversations of COP, and it's the first COP that we have food systems as a protagonist in this discussion. So it's a pleasure to be here with you today. I've known you from other stories, but I thank you for being able to be here in a more comfortable, informal way. Such a nice conversation, which is food. Because why is food systems so important today? When we think about the importance of food systems, we see that everything that happens from the fields to the table, it has this effect on the world, again, gas emissions effect, and it's important to have this conversation of high level, very critical, that we need to have around this theme. So it's so important. We should be very happy that this theme could have a protagonism. And even though it's making it easy, this conversation, I'm also here to give a little bit of visibility of what Nestlé does when it comes to this theme. And today I am responsible of the sustainable area of the company, and we understand as a fundamental role this transformation in this food system. And the theme of food system discussion is how we produce our ingredients. And when we think particularly on the ingredients that are in the table, coffee, cacao, and milk maybe, that are feeding our children, they are responsible for around 2/3 of our scope. And in this understanding, we've committed as a global company to advance and transform how those ingredients are produced. And today we have the joy of talking in a transparent way that we can actually advance in a very consistent way in this journey. And today we have in Brazil around 41% of our ingredients that have been in this regenerative practice. We are in this journey. It's missing a lot, but this is agriculture. When we think about food systems, we need to think in a more broad way, and that's why I thank you that are connected with different steps of the systems and will be in this discussion table, this round table, to talk a little bit more about the theme. So without any more delays, I would like to go straight to this discussion and invite the audience to have questions, ask questions, and also I'm sorry because I have a little bit of an accent. You can see that I'm a little bit tired. You can see that, but please forgive me as we are in this familiar environment and such an uncomfortable environment. So I think our conversation has to do with obviously the importance of the food and the visibility. Of course, we are in the environment of C.A.S.E that has as an intent to show and have visibility to the solutions that are scalable. So in this context, when we think about solutions, how can we think in a chain that have solutions at different points, neurological points? So thinking as the consumer, thinking with Alvaro, I think it's interesting, Alvaro, you've been working directly with the consumers on GlobeScan, and we have invested in different companies and a lot in demonstrating to people how the origin of the ingredients, the traceability, the transparency is important. So I'd like to ask you a little bit if this agenda in this investment, this consumer can value this traceability of the product, because a lot of us, big companies, have been doing a very important work as investors, but particularly as this long chain that is involved, that is commenting policies of the company also, but also engaging the supplier, the farmer that are there in daily basis, and different players in this chain. So how this impacts in the consumer, is it or is it not a driver that can create this differentiation and this cycle of demand, offer and demand? Firstly, thank you for the invitation. It's a pleasure to be here. C.A.S.E is in fact a initiative so important, especially because it's creating solutions and innovations for sustainability. Traceability is still something very distant from the consumer. It's not something that are in the repertoire if we're talking about large scale. So this doesn't happen. The repertoire of the consumer goes until recycling and packaging, and the fact that the water and such, but it doesn't go beyond that. Water, energy, recycling, this is the repertoire when it comes to the consumer, when it comes to the sustainability aspects. But there is this entry point that is wonderful that we've identified in the last researches. We've done, now launched 2 weeks ago, the turn of society, which is the idea of how the consumer engages in climate and nature. And this entry point is health. Health is the big point that will connect the individual to the climate issue and also economical issues as well. This study shows that most part of the global opinion, public opinion, it considers that the healthy economy depends on a healthy environment. And me as an individual, I need those two systemic conditions. So in that sense, I think that everything that is done and can be communicated that talks to this trigger of the consumer is going to have a lot of effect from now on. So traceability is still something to be developed as a concept, as practice, because it's a practice, know our kitchen. So inside of the industry. So for that to be able to get to the consumer still is a process to be developed. So it all goes back to, in a way, in a micro way. So what has impact, this agenda has impact for me, is a lot to do how this transparency needs to impact me as a consumer, as a person. And sometimes we still don't have this as consumer, this notion of collectiveness of how just traceability is being impacting the system that goes beyond the individual and should be distributed in a better way. We're going to say something else. Yes, I was going to comment because we have the labeling and the accreditations that are in this universe, but not exactly the same thing. The traceability is a more profound process, and the consumer sees the labels as a reference. And today it's interesting to perceive that everything that is in the package, the consumer has been taking it more seriously. He understands that the contract is there. The contract between the brand and the consumer is defined on the packaging. If it's there, he can, So it's very interesting point. It's a challenge, right? Because the packaging also has this defined size, and we want to put everything that we do behind the scenes. And it's a challenge for people from the marketing to do it in a compelling way, and that it has relevance for people. So, Andrea, I'd also like to ask you, in this agenda of traceability, do we start that with something simple, where it comes, the product comes from, which is the supplier that's behind that? But we have, if possible, a sophistication of this traceability agenda. What is the carbon footprint of the product, and how do you see education or this understanding of people? Because it's the same thinking that could be applied here. That's what I was asking Alvaro. This agenda, carbon of my product, in my chain, does it impact? Does it have relevance today? How do you see this dimension of traceability with low carbon? Because we talk about all the investments that the companies are doing, finally are thinking about the benefits of the ecosystem, but at the same time, so one of the benefits is the impact of the nature and smaller carbon footprint. Does it have a benefit and impact to communicate that? What is your vision based on your experience? Well, good afternoon. Very happy to be here. Such dear people, I consider friends of a long time. And talking about such a fundamental theme, so congratulations for this coalition, because when a COP of implementation, if there's no collaboration and cooperation and pre-competitiveness of multiple sectors, we're hardly going to get to the solution. So it's very nice to be here. Going back to traceability, I think that traceability is one of the most effective mechanisms and interesting mechanisms for you to effectively transform the business models. because I think that alone, only traceability by itself, not necessarily it's not going to do anything, but it comes in other changes and determinations, especially when it comes to regulation and rules for the introducing in different markets, that traceability is that instrument because it's an instrument that helps to have more transparency, more clarity, and responsibility, making responsible those chains of value. When we're talking about food systems, and it's one of the most fascinating ones for me, the big sectors that really take care of food systems and beyond being connected to something that is absolutely necessary, almost visceral, which is eating. We don't have food, we're going to have social problems, we're going to have serious problems on the social order of violence and lack of security. So preserving those food systems is fundamental for us to go on in a world with more peace, prosperity, in all senses. So to me, traceability is very interesting, but it's difficult to understand on the point of view of depending who's speaking about that. It's not even relevant because it's complex. It's comprehension about the theme. And I have doubts, and I think a lot of the times the consumer with repertoire, he can go after where the food is coming from, how it's produced, what's the consequences of this productive process, but it's a minority. What I think is that this is an instrument that the industry needs to use on its favor to create this competitive advantage and diminish the risks of the chain itself, not only of reputation that can come with the chain that eventually is disclosed and is put on the media as being a chain that is destroying the environment or is not respecting human rights and it couldn't be in this value chain. But beyond that, I think it creates space for the competitive advantage and understanding the resilience of that chain to create alternatives, to make it more diverse and to distribute those choices and effectively create a system of value that is more trustworthy. I tend to think this is very important and transformative, but I have doubts of how effectively to talk about this and how talking about this is effectiveness on the consumer in a bigger scale. So I don't think this means that you shouldn't keep talking about this subject and educating the consumer about that. I just don't think that it's so transformative. And we are living in a time that we transferred a lot of responsibility for the final consumer and their choices as being this big leverage for transformation. Of course, it makes a difference. Individual choices multiplied by millions, billions of people makes it a change, but it's almost unfair to ask that for the final consumer that is working from 5 to 10, and most people in the worldwide lives controlling their budgeting and so they can have more informative choices. I think the industry, the government have a bigger responsibility when it comes to that to effectively implement the changes that needs to be done. So I'm gonna change the question a little bit more because I've seen you doing like just coming. I really agree with what she said. We there's no way not reacting to your reaction. So you're like just shaking your head. So I wanted to know what you think about this responsibility of the conscious consumers and this ethical theme. What is the role of the system of this food systems that is so complex, but the main ones in this change that we need so we can have food that is more, it's regenerating itself. So it's something very complex. It's a big chain. What does it mean in practice? Thank you, Barbara. Effectively is a system. So there's multiple actors that are creating changes at the same time. So firstly, I agree completely with what Andrea said, but I think it's very unfair to put the responsibility into the consumer. The three of you act in those different systems, but let's talk about two: food, cosmetics, packaging. How many PhDs do you need to have to understand all of it? To understand certainly what is in the labeling of a product. It's impossible. There are few people in the world that can effectively understand everything that is in the shelves of the market so they can buy in a more responsible way. So stop putting the responsibility on the consumer. Effectively, the consumer has this capacity of asking, of aspiring, but we that operate in the industry, we know what we're doing. We know when we actually have the capacity of producing and actually ask for the chain of value to be more responsible. This is a dimension of deepness of decision. And the other dimension is how the system is moving in time. I always like to say, well, it's good to discuss now, where is this agenda today? I remember 11th of November. But if we go a step back to look the whole of it, I think I met you when I came to Brazil, 2014, I think. You were in Natura, you were in Pepsi, and you were always in Nestle, right? It was my first year. Oh, to me, you've always been in Nestle. I've met you three. It's been 11 years. Look how the world was, how it has changed. The history, would it be possible to be talking about 11 years ago about regenerative this is like it goes to the asylum. What are these guys talking about? 11 years ago, talking about that, it'd be crazy. There wasn't the Paris Agreement. This plastic in the environment came into the agenda in January 2016, and it seems like it was always there. No, 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 no. It's in this accelerated moment. And the history of ingredients and chain of value, and obviously Natura has been doing this for like 40 years. The history of the press of the active consumption is very strong, and it's from now. So those are roots that are complementing each other. Nestle with share value apparently obviously has a lot of views, but it has accelerated and helped accelerate others as well. And I'm going to introduction because this is not the first COP that put food in the center of it. I would say that me as a lesbian being in agriculture, the truth is I was very surprised that it wasn't in COP. So I started to put it forward, and my team makes jokes, oh, farms in the center. But the reality is that a copy of Dubai, for instance, they put food and act as a very important agenda and created an agenda from Dubai to Belém. And in fact, yesterday, we took ownership of this agenda. How was it built? Understanding that it's an agenda that has, beyond what you said, a system of food in agriculture that is a third of the green gas effect, and 70% of the usage of potable water. But it's an agenda that should include other two components. The test of the food production is put into the components, and that has an effect on the greenhouse gases. But today we're in the world that approximately 800 million people are starving, and 100 million people are having food unsafety, and a third of the food is judged, but 50 million people has different kinds of problems of health related to food. So it's a system that it doesn't work. So we started to try and work with a different proposal, putting forward all of those agendas, social, with this, with food as well, with this umbrella that goes with the theme agenda. So COP in Dubai, we got 160 countries to sign the commitment. That was absolutely unique because at the same time we created a commitment of the non-governmental players, and they participated on this agenda, and the agenda that we've delivered yesterday, that will have a bunch of events in the other weeks. This commitment uses the commitment of Glasgow to detain deforestation and the commitment of Sharm el-Sheikh to decelerate the transition and adaptation around the small farmers, and put an agenda of indigenous people, of regeneration, being and water or agriculture, and trying to decelerate the food loss and organic waste that are around. And of course, it has this transformation on productive products, dairy, meat, and everything that is helping the transformation of rice to diminish the methane, and incorporates insects. And we have an agenda to decarbonize the energy that we use to transport the food, and to transform the fertilizers to fertilizers with less carbon footprint, and the transformation of oxynutrients. So we have a very complete agenda for the happiness and pride who is working in this agenda. It was converted on the third axis of the agenda of action of COP30, and incorporated another element, another food that it was very important, which is Project C.A.S.E, that develops an agenda to recuperate the degraded areas. It's very important. 1.5 billion of hectares that need to be recuperated, because we've been losing 250 million hectares of agriculture production, and this will complement itself with other river conventions, which is the accreditation that has the agenda of action that the first time is perfectly speaks with the agenda of climate. And so has this common agenda that talks about the importance to recuperate those degraded area for agriculture, and to fulfill the objectives of those two conventions. So it has this beautiful advancement on the policies and conventions that, and it's going to be delivered, the diplomacy architecture. So at least on the last 5 COPs, we're gonna have guaranteed, in theory, this agenda will continue on the next 5 COPs. But as it's been said before, there's going to be a time that this comes out of the political environment, and it gets into the civil one. The responsibility today is in the hands of the companies, of the financing sectors, and the capability of productivity. And in my view, is in strengthening this logic on the agriculture. And we have beautiful we have agriculturists that talk about, I don't know about this whole thing. What I know is that if I incorporate this agenda, I have more profitability. So there's a lot of producers of soy, and they are more than a decade easily working with regenerative agriculture because it's more profitable. And the main producer of meat is the livestock producer that is working with this with the sciences and science applicability of regenerative. We need to convince them that it's not against the production, this agenda. And it's necessary at the same time taking politics out of it, out of the equation, and people who are in this agriculture environment, and help the transformation of the conventional system to a regenerative one, and have the coverage of the financing. And I think this agenda now, not only for Brazil, but if Brazil is going to convince itself, and it's going to convince the other regions of the world as well. And afterwards, how this is going to have the flag transformation in the next year, and how is the logic of regenerative agriculture, tropical one, is going to be understood differently from the cold areas of the globe. We have a lot of challenges, but I think if we understand what we've been advancing as a system, being in politics and or the logistic of the consumers, we have been advancing a lot, and we need to understand the collision of those points and where we need to pressure from now on. It's good that you brought the outcomes point, because I'm going to pass it on to Andrea soon. We already have outcomes when it comes to the most important chain, which is the dairy chain. We understand that this outcome is important to come out of the politics to actually influence the producer. Today, dairy product that is being implementing those regenerative practices has 78% more productivity. So this 15% more of profitability and 19 less of carbon footprint. So we can scale this and be able to accelerate the scale. So those movements of competitiveness have the potential to give this visibility. Understand that this is a green agenda of productivity that has this positive impact. I'm sorry, it's not politics. When we have the tendency on talking about green less as policies, politics, it's an overall green of the humanity, really. When we have positive results and the certainty, I think Andrea can bring examples as Pepsi and Natura in your experience of the private sector, and having more visibility on edges as well. I'd like your opinion of how we can make so those cases that we have in different companies on the public sector give the more relevance and visibility, and will allow us to accelerate this implementation and actually get the scale that Gonzalo was talking about, how necessary it is. So your vision on the public sector of how this movement of giving visibility on a pre-competitive level and connecting other sectors and help us to go quicker. I think it's by love and by pain the way to accelerate the action. I think we need to remember that there's a lot of dynamics that simultaneously work. From one side, I think in fact it exists a lot of companies that are responsible, that are conscious of its impact and actively seeking to transform their business model to reduce and mitigate negative impact and improve their value chain, being in emission of carbon, being on human rights, integrity, governance, or nature. Truthfully, it's all connected. We separated and fragmented those discussions. We learned to do that, but the most interesting one is that are looking to the whole scope of it all. I tend to think that there is this logic in the market that is very hard to face without you putting a contrary force on the plateau that it has. And we know, in fact, that for you to operate in the world, the indications of results of all companies, especially the big ones and public ones, is the increaseness of EBITDA and volume top line. If you are a good company or a service company and general top line, I think this incentive for the continuous growth in the way that we've structured today, beyond a study that will award the access to more cheap capital, and not even when you grow, but when you grow more than your colleague, your analysis always versus your peer company, how many BPS round you have, what's your top line. And you're always comparing with your colleague if you won from him in that process. From one side is interesting because it stimulates innovation, best practices, and efficiency, but it has this bad logic when you are seeking this in any cost. And this is one of the difficulties to accelerate the transformation, even if we know that we should be doing different things. It's very hard to resist to this plateau, and it's not the people or the departments, because sometimes we fall into this logic. The CFO is not aligned to CSO. It's not about those areas or those individuals. It's about the incentives that effectively are put there, and that a lot of times are contradictory. And then we'll stop this quick alignment for this accelerated transformation. And I think we need to have that as a conscious, because it's then that I think the regulation is important, because in fact you create this level playing field for everyone to have a same stimulus to change at the same time. And it's hard, but a lot of the time this is how it works. The climate litigation, it in general is hard for the companies that have the consequences, suffer those consequences, but I stimuli that accelerate this transformation and end up accelerating things that need to be done. So this dialogue of strength, I think it's important to remember that it happens, and we need this to externalize this to accelerate the internal processes. And sometimes it could be a positive incentive. So going back to your question specifically, in this case, I think we've lived a time where we had companies that were very admired by its boldness, by transformation, and ahead of time agenda. And we had the whole system that recognized that. It created paths and references. A lot of people took Natura as reference to sell changing plans on their companies because it made sense, somebody that was in the ahead. So this place of being ahead changes, and I think this is very interesting as well. So having institutions like ethos that has a mission to incentivize and inspire the private sector to seek model of businesses that work for a more ethical, more sustainable society is also a place that you create this repertoire where you educate, share information, and help to create those agendas of transformation, starting from the state that we are in a place that is ideal, where we want to get to, and maps on this direction with different instruments. Thank you. Thank you, Andrea. I'm learning, we're all learning together here in this round table. I think that I wanted to go back to when Andre is talking about the motivation and pain. What is voting for the consumer, for the people? How can you see, and maybe it's a bad usage of the American Latin situation, understanding if Brazil is actually a differential, or if we can see that the consumers in a way are starting to move to help in the Spain or the acceleration of agenda, to understand and recognize that linked products with food that is more regenerative, so on, if it actually have a broad mission, if the consumer has been able to do in a way to connect with this, being by health, as you commented before, nutrition, or connecting and understanding that if they had something to contribute with the community as a whole, what's your vision beyond Brazil? And Latin America is interesting. It's a region that thinks alike. All the countries, we've researched 33 countries in the world, at least 6 in the Latin America, and all of them we would take a different take, a little bit different, Colombia, Mexico, Brazil, think very alike and has a very big sensibility on the environmental issues. They are on the top of the public opinion, interested, worried, attentive to the climate issues. And I think it has a lot to do with this, that in this strain that we have with the Amazon. I think that makes it so the sensitivity of those people when it comes to the environmental would be naturally and culturally bigger. So this is a big opportunity for the organizations to work generally. From the other side, there's a lot of dimensions, everything. So it's a continent with a lot of insecurity when it comes to financing. So any type of choice depends on at least for you to offer something that have similar cost to what already exists, what it's consumed, and so on. So you cannot ask additional efforts from the financial standpoint and thinking about scale, right? Of those populations, because they don't have conditions. So this will limit the choice. This makes it so actually stops the choice. So in that sense, I think we agree completely with the issue of how unfair it is to transfer to the consumer the action in the measure that the consumer has a limitation to exert this action. And even though it wants and it expressed that he wants or she wants and the consumer itself, but clearly there's this limit of survival. So we need innovation, we need systems to produce the conditions so the choice is exerted. At least the issue of cost is to be there, because then you have education, information, and then the consumer can exert what potentially the consumer wishes, let's say. So I think it goes through this necessity of finding solutions that in fact will make it feasible and viable the actions of the consumer. I think it's interesting in this aspect that the consumer they seem to affirm that they are doing what they can. And there was this conscious assumption, and they say that they do what they can. And they believe, and the last research shows that they believe that now it's the government and companies' part to give a new leverage for the actions of the consumers is to create the systems for the consumers to do this better. In a way, those agents, and with time, as it was put by Gonzalo, they're going to start to align and understanding what their role is in this context. Truthfully, everybody wants that, but it's a moment for the companies and governments being innovation or regulation or sector agreements to create the space for action. And Grosalo has described everything that is being done and that is converging on this direction. Thank you. Knowing, of course, the price cannot be changed, and this is a learning that the companies already have for a long time, that this is not a cost that needs to be taken by the consumers in investment, and has a lot to do with what you commented previously, the chains of value, its resilience, and beyond the benefits that are social and environmental. And you couldn't identify in your research as any narrative, a angle of entry for the consumer to prefer a product to quality and pricing that is more sustainable. What is the change in the narrative, the potential, the opportunity of change in the narrative? The recent study shows that there is this fatigue and disengaging of the consumers from the North in relation to the global North when it comes to climate. Tired, there's this politics issue, but I also think that they've been involving themselves before the process and they couldn't see so many effects. And now they're creating an aversion to it. So we had a question about the emotional reactions of the consumers to the environmental news. And it's interesting, still the main reaction is the hope, but afterwards it comes the anxiety and the fear. So they have those mixed feelings, and those mixed feelings that awakens this environmental information. And in the discussion with negative and counterstructive negative, it cannot produce action anymore. It produces reactiveness, and the way would be to the search of a positive narrative that would identify the quick wins and opportunities of the consumer, actions in which has the perception of the benefit of that action. This narrative and should bring evidence of the result of that action. And that together can build a space for the consumer again, can be an agent, can act, can be a player, but all in function of a point of view of actions, small actions, objective actions, efficient actions that are positive, with knowing this and in this process. So the traction can be given in this way, and I hope that's the case. And then with this health point of view, when it comes to the perspective of food, it's a big opportunity. Great, thank you. Can I speak? Of course. I was part of some of roundtables, debates, and as a Global Scan council, and some things caught my attention. Simple messaging is more effective. The concrete messaging that people they can connect themselves to, health, planet health, human health, and how far this goes, being tangible and close and mobilizer. And there was a third that obviously forgot, which is the COVID effects from my age. I'm sorry, I'm not going to remember the third thing, but it was important. But maybe till the end of the panel, I'll remember. No problem. I'll remember in a bit. I'll remember in a bit. I'm going to come back to you, but I think it was interesting that in a way our conversation went to the consumption part. I think we maybe need to understand when we're talking about the shelves, the field, we're talking about people who are consuming food, but I was trying to see if there was any narrative that would connect it back to the food. Because when Gustavo was talking, we have a third of the food that is being wasted, and this has an impact in global level on the big emissions. It's because we as people, and I'm talking about a consumer, we don't have this connection with food. So a question for Gonzalo, in your perspective and your experience, how can we create this conscious? What mechanisms do we need to utilize to leverage this sensitization, this awareness of people with small acts? We as citizens, how can we make a difference in this agenda as a positive agenda that would connect us more with this more hopeful part of a positive future, this dark prospects are thinking, oh, if we don't act, the world's going to end. Of course, this has anxiety involved. And of course, the food that is in your table could be something more relatable, closest to what you connect to. My vision is this is a utopic world, but I don't think this is the way. My impression is that we are very far away if the changes is going to be generated with this individual issues and collective issues. Of course, I have more specific knowledge. There are groups of the population and countries and regions that this is happening more. But we have a lot of imagery on renewable energy. Last year, it was invested probably double in the regions of the fossil fuel. Was that given to any consumer? This is good, yes, obviously, but this is in the systems, and we've been evolving for the dialogue that happens outside of the majority. Myself, I put solar panels to energize my wine plantation 2 years ago, and it has a lot to do with what needed to happen. Obviously, we've been saving money, but today this happens because it's better financially, firstly, and secondly, diminishing the risks and the positions of different regulations. Of course, the finance, the finance is very important, and we need to convince or try to evolve via the responsibility of the companies that align with the correct thing. Today, we're still in a society that is been advancing in this logic that has been disappearing, that is more expensive and it's worse. The scope of the person, the truth is, we as humans, we are very selfish. The link that we need to create is in the scope of health. Because people are going to react quickly when is the subject that reflects on their health, their children's health. And what are the foods that we are able to take out? And the chemicals that are dangerous, you know this yourself, of artificial coloring, artificial so on. We have this advancement when it comes to food coloring, and it talks about the health of the people, health of their children, and this will make so it's a quicker movement, and agrochemicals, and that creates this link with health. This is way easier than now. You're doing something that is good for the environment and better for a world outside of my vision. And to various generations, we operate in the same square of today. What about my children? What about my money, my pocket? So this is the challenge that we have as a society, to be able to help to create those nexus and accelerate a transformation that's happening anyway. And it's better financially. That's why it's happening. And I have a story that is very good for this region. Pará is a livestock region, so it has millions and millions of cattle, and you can trace it, the areas that you don't know, you see that there's even more cattle. So on the main markets for cow and like the China boy, we're not going to buy a cow that is more than 2 years ago but more than 2 years old and is sold like 400, 500 kilograms, and it's more than that. And a cow that will have 400, 500 kilometers of, so it has gone down. This environmental issue, you can, the subject was market, financial risks, and business risks. And the environmental issue of Pará has gone down because there was a client saying, I want a cow that is more than 2 years old, which is the China cow. Boy China. So the emissions on the productive chain has diminished. And it's the combination of all the factors. The world, in some cases, and sometimes very quickly, the revolution that we've been following up for a few years of transformation of the electoral sector is impressive. The International Agency of Energy put before the Agreement of Paris a trajectory that has been surpassing more than 16 times faster on the transformation of the electrical renewable energies, more than the International Agency of Energy has imagined for the year since the year 2016. And the General Director of the International Agency of Energy said, the electrical car, this motor of that car is still going to be competitive with the, well, until 2080, it will. Not today. Not today. 4 years ago, all the vehicle branding that was serious, and that was 90% of the companies, said that in 2035, we wouldn't have internal combustible cars anymore. So in 2020, would say, it's been 16 years. But China, I don't know. And this planking, they're talking about renewable energies. It was triple. Oh, maybe the next 15 years, we're gonna sell electrical cars in the same level as traditional cars. So in 35, we're gonna sell more electrical cars than conventional cars. So this should happen 35, and it happened last year. So we're living in this technological change completely linked to this financial transformation of risks of market that needs to be followed up with public policies. And we have countries that have been advancing in that way, inspired by the agreement, sometimes not, and others doing stupid things. Oh, I'm gonna get out of the Paris Agreement. Oh, COP, I'm not gonna send my delegation. I'm gonna let the world advance. And the United States has given in a platter to China this leadership. But inside of the United States, you have places as California to continue on this route. So it has different scopes happening at the same time, and obviously this helps itself, it supports itself, and obviously you have this group of consumers that would say, oh, let's accelerate this issue, and this has been happening. Plastics the last 10 years, and probiotic products, protein, everything, it's been changing a lot. So this helps. But it needs to advance, also understanding what of the companies, and just doing a summary, a close up on what do you see on the private sector. This is for the three of you in the private sector to accelerate this transformation, fields to the shelves, and the corporations, the collaboration that we have in this beautiful house as case of this pre-competitive collaboration, how this connections can help us to accelerate this agenda of the transformation of the food that you put on the table. Maybe you're connecting with the consumers, and they're bringing a little bit about the experience of the private sector and also in the industry as a consultant. And Gonzalo also in his experience with COP and ex-champions. I think it was already explored a lot. What the consumers alone, they're not able to do anything. They in fact need the system to move, the food systems to have this initiative, and allows the consumers to exert their intentions that are generally good, and expresses those positive desires when it comes to nature and themselves, even though the individualism is a brand. When they look on the issue of family, this is more solid and allows that the intentions, positive intentions, will flourish. So I think what we actually hope is that this whole, some years we've been talking about the systemic changes, and to me it seems that they start to now to become visible in the horizon. I think this is the big aspect. We started to talk about traceability. Traceability only happens if the whole sector will take on the possibility of making it possible, and this will actually be scalable. But what we actually needing, and I think it really matches the proposal of CASE, is exactly the coalitions, the actions, sectoral actions, intersectoral actions that will transform and produce little by little, starting on the transformation of the market, the changes that are necessary. I think this is the process that are ongoing, that is ongoing. And it seems to me that is getting more leverage now. We don't know for certain, myself and as observer, external observer of the scope of negotiations of COP, maybe Gonzalo can give us more deep vision on that. We don't know what to expect on the negotiations and the official results, but what we do know is that there are other scopes as the agenda of action that will open pathways that are very important for the implementation, right? And I think that bringing this, giving leverage for the companies to give the answers that we expect from them. And it goes through a lot through the innovation and solutions as the ones that are going to be presented throughout COP. Well, I think on the private sector is absolutely fundamental inside of the discussion of implementation. We're talking about an implementation COP and action, and they've already been done, and we need to create mechanisms so they effectively happen. And I think in the same sense, we know what needs to be done. We need to align incentives and create conditions for those possibilities to materialize on a daily basis in transformation of the models. And I think those discussions, pre-competitive discussions, helps a lot because you distribute yourself in a bigger group, those challenges of transformations that are very real. For you to fight this plateau that I talked a little bit previously, I am a big fan of the idea of going back to thinking in a territory as a block of transformation. We were obsessed with the global agenda for a long time, and I still think they're valid. And the timing of multilateralism and global agendas is it's longer than what we think that we have in terms of timing of transformation. In this sense, I think local transformation and the companies that are capable to align their international agendas and global frameworks, having this sensitivity to implement answers that are adapted and contextualized to the different biomes and ecosystems, countries, regions, preferable food and culture, they are so much ahead of the possibility of the real transformation. So being able to disconnect of this global timing and concentrate on the local timing of the transformation, I think it's very interesting. I think the national companies have more capability of doing so. The international also, Nestle has this huge chain of local producers. So it's an impact that a company like that can do locally, and it needs to do locally. And I think the companies need to remember always of this different power changes that are related to the stakeholders, and that cannot be forgotten. So we have huge companies, and when we think about local solutions, the previous consultation that is free and considered, and this conversation that is respectable with respect with the players in the value chain is not being established. I think we miss the chance to do something to transform this climate trajectory, which is the implementation of a climate just agenda and value distribution. The world is very unequal, and this plateau takes to a concentration of richness and inequality even bigger. And if it's not amplified consciously, and we think about answers of how we can do those policies and how we treat other stakeholders, and consciously thinking about if what I'm doing is amplifying inequalities or reducing them, we're going to miss the change to do a transformation, climate transformation, that is not transforming the equal agenda. And we cannot do that. Brazil is the 8th planet economy, but is one of the 10 that is the most unequal around the world. So we cannot think about transformation when it comes to climate and climate agenda without thinking on the social agenda of transformation and justice. So the companies need to look at that in practice. I would like to refer to the two big blocks of innovation. One of them is more structural, and inside of it, I'd like to understand how the world has been evolving. The companies, as I said before, you know well, have been measuring the fundamental success through the last line of the balance, and the world norm that regulates that is in the most important processes for incorporating the parameters of sustainability. Does not forget what this implies on the point of view of changing the definition of success for a company. This is fundamental to follow up on all the details of agriculture or any type of company. We also know in the scope of company B, Natura, and other companies as such, and we're getting into another stage of the standards of the companies because 10, 15 years ago, of what is the standard of a normal company, and what's been happening is that this pattern has been evolving, and at some moment the companies are talking about, oh, we're going to evolve at another level, and this is very symbolic. And then 10 years later, okay, we're going to get into another stage of revision of the standards. So those three are very important of how the companies need to evolve, and what was before a great performance sometimes is going to be standardized. And if you really want to deliver value and extend this agenda, understand it, you need to evolve as well. So when we're talking about food production, the translation apologizes, we cannot hear. Oh, out of battery, sorry. So specific nutrients, we're going to try to understand which ingredients. So when we talk about nutrients, ingredients, we have this calorie challenge, but also protein challenge. And a lot of challenges in Brazil, if it keeps delivering the proteins to the world, if Brazil, in a way that doesn't destroy the environment, but if Brazil doesn't follow up this agenda, what has happened is that the traditional mechanism of producing protein is going to be the conventional car and is going to have the electrical car. The electric car is necessarily a production of soy protein. The electric car is called labro protein. I've already eaten it. The flavor is perfect. I've eaten chicken, and that this company is producing for 7 years the protein of kitchen, starting from one cell. that they extracted 7 years ago without the suffering of animals. The environmental charge is the minimum, and the energetical resources still expensive, but it's going to go down as the battery of the electrical car has gone down, and the same flavor is the same. But the burger that I ate had the profile, nutritional profile of a salmon. You can produce a protein that, in the standpoint of when it comes to nutrition, is even better than the conventional production. So I think that we have this evolution of what implies and how you do the company, how you obtain those objectives, but we still at the same time having in each sector what implies the electrical car. For the protein production, the electrical car is called fundamentally labor meat, and I think we are going to consume insects directly or indirectly, because I think it's very important for the protein food, but we need to take on these changes in the velocity that is happening, that is bigger than what we've been used to in the past. Wow, guys, I thank you for your participation. I think that we had different perspectives, bringing the sustainable development, equitable development, that makes us dream about a better future and bringing us hope. And in this innovation, how it's going to transform this conversation that we're having and change the curve, not in the same curve. It's going to be a different curve. It's totally different, where we're going to be talking about something different, and we need to accelerate it. Big companies that are representing here, we need to accelerate this adoption so we can guarantee that this change can happen in a timely manner. Because I think we don't have a lot of time, but by the reason for the love and for the pain is what you said. And there are a lot of forces that are going to help us to go on. So thank you for your time, for your availability, and talking to all of us. Does anybody in the audience have any questions or suggestions, comments that you want to share with us at all? Well, good afternoon. Thank you for your panel. I'm Guilherme from Vale. I know that what's in your heads, and it hasn't been discussed, is the mission of the consumption. I just wanted a quick word about that. Less consumption. About the decreasing of consumption and not substitution of consumption. I think it should be part of the conversation, definitely. This discussion of negative growth, and it's based on this idea of consuming less, and those companies can dialogue with the GDPs that decrease, and this would be acceptable inside of the economical logic, and we are not having an heart attack when this happens. And understanding this is possible when it comes to administration of business. I've met one French company of cosmetics that's Mustela, I don't know how to say it, that are baby products, all very sophisticated, premium. It sells in Brazil as well. And I heard something from their CEO that they're working in this agenda of reduction of physical volume. They were the reduction of physical volume, but they were still connected of scenario of revenue growth. They were selling products that were more expensive and more specialized. This I could deal inside of my logistics, but the fall of revenue, I couldn't find a way to justify in the trajectory of reduction of revenue. They would still accept it if you have the reduction or equality of revenue with lucrativity, but this is inside of the economical logistics, but this is still hard, and the model today awards the reverse, and the same thing for countries that need resources to be able to do their plans of government and having mobility and security and all the changes that the government needs to do. So you not having this revenue, considering a better GDP, we find ourselves in this problem, this conundrum. How can we do it a different way? I didn't see any model that has effectively projected this. I've seen movements of people, I don't like calling them consumers, people that take on disadvantages for their lives. And they say, oh, I'm going to consume less, I'm going to live in a more simple way, I'm going to eat only locally, produce locally, and I'm going to wear the same clothing 100 times. I'm not going to buy clothes all the time. And I see that in an individual scope, not structurally of the institutions, of the companies, and even the governments that have the logic of sustainability based on the growth of the GDP or of their revenue or their profitability. You forgot the numbers that Gonzalo's has mentioned. Gonzalo's is good with numbers. I'm not. What about me? I don't even remember my third point. I'm not gonna say 3 mentions anymore because I forget them. Oh, there's still people that need to be inserted in the fair way to the minimum consumption. So when you see the hyperconsumption is something that could actually happen, we need to also consider the millions of people that still need to be inserted to a level of consumption that is acceptable. So we have this process of the reduction of consumption is something that is not exactly part of the solution in a short term. Well, sorry, I remember something. Is a concept associated to that is insufficiency. These ideas that are emerging, what is sufficient for somebody to live that is associated with the hyperconsumption and the indecency on revenue that we see on the planet today, because it's about that. We have an imbalance of consumption that is gigantic, that it needs to be think again. So it's this web that is linked. So there's emerging things, and I haven't seen a answer to that yet. And society is building around consumption, is a value. And it goes back to changing the values of a society for decades. Even the behaviors can change before the values do. So I think it's beautiful to think on the possibility of us having a society that value the non-consumption, but it has part of a population that really dreams of the minimum consumption, which is a right that the person should have.
Now, to bring this to the space of the panel where dealing with food as a trajectory that's moving forward, which is making throw food away illegal. And that is, well, fundamentally a part that is educational, cultural, but today many countries in France, supermarkets that throw food away will have a punishment, a penalty, and that will move forward. Why? Because it's inefficient. It's unacceptable inefficiency and has multiple impacts, not only from the economic point of view, there is a negative impact over society. I'm a member of the Global Food Networking Bank network. We're here in Brazil trying to make this food reach the people who need to eat and avoid the waste of that food, emitting greenhouse effect gases. There's a part of this food agenda that will move forward inevitably towards penalizing waste food, and that obviously creates a cultural wave. Well, you will serve what is going to be eaten, you're going to buy only what's going to be eaten, and so forth. In this agenda, we can have another panel to talk about textile, electronics, other topics, but food, I think we are in the wrong direction as to avoid excessive and unnecessary consumption. Well, people, thank you very much. Thank you, three, as for the labs, for the contributions, and thank you for being here today. And I thank C.A.S.E and the whole team who organized this such wonderful panel, this such wonderful space to host us and discuss solutions that should really have an impact over our food systems. Thank you very much. Good evening or good night.